We're having open and honest conversations about mental health and well-being. We should talk about it with Maira Ansari on Wave Now.
Hey there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here on Wave Now's podcast. We should talk about it. I'm Maira Ansari with Dr. Stephen Taylor from UofL Health Peace Hospital. So September is Suicide Prevention Month, and we have talked about the importance of talking about suicide, resources that are out there for you before, but we want to talk about it again because it's so important. Several months ago, we lost a fellow coworker here at Wave to suicide, and it was heartbreaking for us. And although we talk about it all the time, it became very real, and the impacts of it became very real. And I don't think we can talk about it enough. Right, Dr. Taylor?
I think that's true. I think that's very true. You know, and one of the tragedies of suicide, well, there's a lot of tragedies of it, but one of the things that I was thinking about as you were doing the intro is the fact that, suicide, people who commit suicide often feel that they don't really have an impact or it won't have an impact on the people around them, which is, I don't think, ever true.
No.
I think there's always an impact. And so I think whenever we're talking about suicide, we can't avoid talking about the survivors, people who survive it, people who are left behind, like you all losing a colleague to suicide. There's a lot in there for us to talk about.
It's a lot, and I wish that the people who were contemplating these thoughts would know how much they are valued, how much they are loved, how much of a loss there would be if they decided to carry something out like this. And I know that many of you who are joining us right now on this stream, maybe you've been impacted by suicide. If you want to share your story, please do so here on the stream. Sometimes that ability to talk about it takes that weight off. And a lot of people, that thought has crossed their mind. Mm-hmm. And it's a really tough thing to deal with.
Yeah. I think the ability to talk about it is always a crucial piece for us to consider and think about. Years ago, there was a study done at the University of Louisville looking at suicides and what percentage of people who had successfully committed suicide had actually sought help or gone to a psychiatrist or a hospital or whatever for help. So they looked at 100 cases from the coroner's office here in town, and of the 100 cases, only 2 of them had ever sought mental health treatment in the past. Only 2 of the 100 had ever sought treatment. The other 98 had never been in treatment, never sought help, never attempted suicide before, and they had completed the suicide. Mm-hmm. So there's no question. What that tells us is that talking about it and talking with someone about your thoughts and feelings is 100% beneficial. Mm-hmm. We rarely lose somebody to suicide if they're talking about it, but we most certainly will lose them if they're not talking about it.
If someone's talking about it, is that a way that I should take, you're trying to get help. I'm trying to find someone who's going to change my mind.
Right. I think that's true. Otherwise, why bring it up? You know, we live in a society where if somebody mentions it, well, the first thing we're going to do is try to get them in the hospital or get them help or something. And we all know that. So no one's going to mention it if they're really intending to follow through. So I do think when people bring it up, it is a reach out for help, and I think they owe it to themselves and we owe it to them to do whatever we can do to help.
So according to the World Health Organization, more than 720,000 people, they die due to suicide every year. Think about that, 720,000 people. And it's the 3rd leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds. Mm-hmm. You haven't really even experienced life at that age, right? Like the real trials and tribulations of life haven't even come. What is this saying about our society and how we're living?
It says a lot about our society and how we're living. It also says a lot about the process of development, too. You know, as we are developing and becoming adults and finding our independence, there's a lot about that that's kind of depressing. You know, when I'm a teenager, I don't have to pay taxes. When I'm an adult, I do. Mm-hmm. I may be able to live at home when I'm a teenager. When I'm an adult, I don't get to live with my parents anymore. I've got to be on my own. So there are a lot of things that are just normal aspects of developing our independence that are kind of scary and depressing. So, that time of life is a challenge anyway. Teenagers to adolescents to late adolescence, in my way of thinking, is the toughest. It's the toughest phase. It is the toughest phase of life.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier after that.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we see suicide rates drop in adults above the age of 25 until we get to late middle age when we start seeing an uptick in suicides again in our older population.
I know that there's a parent out there that's watching us right now. Maybe their child is dealing with, I don't know, they're struggling in school academically. Maybe they're being bullied, they're being picked on, and it feels like the end of the world. Like, how do you make your child realize, okay, I know that you're struggling. I know that maybe they have expressed something negative like suicide. What do you do?
Well, I think the first thing is to be open and listening and hearing what they say and hearing where they're coming from and making sure that they're heard. That's important. I think one of the things that study I mentioned a few minutes ago tells us is that being heard is very beneficial and helpful. And feeling like you're being heard is helpful and beneficial. So when we hear our youngsters talking about suicide, the most important thing we can do is create a safe space for them and to be open and to hear them. That's I think, the most important first thing we can give them.
So after I've done that as a parent, I've listened, and I'm concerned. What do I do next?
Well, so you've listened to them, you're concerned about them, you're showing that you care, and they can sort of give you the lead on where to go next,
Or if they're like, Mom, Dad, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't need to talk to a therapist. I've got this.
Yeah. Well, I've never imagined a teenager say
Exactly.
say
That doesn't happen.
That never happens.
Yeah.
Well, I think, being open and saying, we're always here, we're always going to be here. You need to know that we're always going to be here, and I will continue to be here. And even if that means kind of being in their face a little bit, that's okay.
It's okay to be pushy about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's important.
So how does a parent start getting into the path of finding their child, or your young adult, or any age? Okay, I need to get some help. Where do I go?
Yeah, well, of course, we obviously know the 988.
Yes, and I put a link to that here on this stream.
There. We can always call friends, ministers, if you're involved in faith communities, calling the helplines, calling therapists if you have a therapist, talking to them. University of Louisville, talking to the telehealth medicine option that is now open there too. So there are a lot of venues that we can look at. NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, has a web page, and that has a lot of local information that you can look at by looking them up too.
What is something, Dr. Taylor, warning signs or things that people should be aware of?
Changes in behavior, changes in attitude, isolating suddenly. What's also alluded to in that first study that I mentioned a while ago, the people who succeeded in committing suicide were the people who were isolating themselves and not talking about it. So if you've got a kid who's suddenly staying locked in their room, they're isolated, if you can see what kind of social media traffic they're getting or what they're looking at, that can sometimes give you some clues. What are they watching on Instagram? What are they watching on YouTube? If there's a sudden change in those patterns or behaviors, that's always something that can be a red flag for mental health issues.
And how do you approach someone if they start talking about it? Of course, you hope that there's no judgment in it, but...
Yeah, well, if they start talking about it, that's the first step, because they've already opened the door. I'm depressed. I feel like I don't want to live anymore. That's the bid to let's talk. I think the main thing is to not be afraid to talk about it. I think one of the things that we get ourselves worried about is that if we talk about it or if we talk about suicide, that we're going to somehow put the idea in their mind to kill themselves or how they might do it. And that's not likely at all. They're way ahead of us in terms of what they're thinking anyway. So mentioning it, talking about it, bringing it up is just bringing it out in the open, and it makes it much safer for them and for you if you're just talking.
When you hear of someone who took their life by suicide, Dr. Taylor, what's your what's your reaction? What is a normal reaction? What is a,
Well, I mean, you're going to grieve. I mean, you're losing somebody. So it's not unusual to feel rage and anger and being
Blame.
upset, blame. Whose fault is it? I once heard somebody say that suicide is taking the skeletons out of your closet and putting them in somebody else's closet and checking out. And I think there's some truth to that, because a lot of times we take on the burdens of the people who've taken their lives as if somehow that's our burden to carry, as if we're responsible for it.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing would be to say that you're not responsible for somebody else's suicide. In general, that's not going to be the case. We can feel that way. We can blame ourselves. But I think the first piece of it is to recognize it's a decision that the person who's going to take their life makes, and it's not our decision or our fault that they've done that.
How much of shame does play into all of this?
Well, I mean, shame is the emotion that people who need it aren't going to have, and people who have it don't need it. Shame is one of those things that can really pull us down and burden us with self-blame, self-doubt. It can make us paralyzed and unable or unwilling to think about what's happened or to be able to start making plans on how to change things.
I think when you hear other people who, now that we are more open to talking about, have you thought about suicide? And you'll be surprised at maybe how many people around you say, yeah, I thought about it. I tried it. Thank goodness it didn't happen, or someone stopped me. I think we'll be surprised how many times maybe it's crossed somebody's mind and you're not sitting there thinking, okay, I'm the only one with these thoughts in my head.
That's another part of that self-isolation piece. I'm the only one thinking this way. I'm the only one who feels this way. And that's part of how we can become more insulated against the people around us. And that makes us more vulnerable and puts us in a higher risk category than if we're actually talking about it.
I think for sometimes when we hear of somebody committing suicide, it's just, you think, how could they do this? They had it all together. They had a family. They had a job. They had a house. They had food on the table. What was going so wrong in their life that they felt, okay, I've got to do this? That's kind of something that we think a lot.
And it can be mind-bending to try to imagine it, but people who are planning suicide or thinking about suicide are not in a normal mental state, if I can use the word normal. And so it's irrational, and it's going to be irrational. And the way we're thinking when we're thinking about suicide is not rational. And if we can recognize that, that's also where talking, I think, can be helpful, because we need to be surrounded by people who are thinking differently and can help us see out of the hole or the pit that we've gotten ourselves into.
If you're feeling this way, you can get out of it, right, Dr. Taylor?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What would you say to that person right now?
I would say there's hope. You can get out of this. Talk. Don't keep it to yourself. Find somebody that you can talk to and rely on, and reach out to that person.
Absolutely. Again, we've put the link to 988, also more information on suicide awareness, what you can do to get help. Dr. Taylor mentioned telehealth. As someone who has done telehealth a number of times, let me tell you, it is an amazing gift that we have now as far as medicine and technology, because we all lead busy lives. We put ourselves on the back burner, right? Maybe these thoughts have creeped into my mind because I haven't been taking care of myself. I feel like I have no time to drive to a doctor's office and sit there and wait and talk to a therapist. This can make it a lot easier.
Absolutely, especially if you've got a busy schedule and you don't have a lot of time for traveling back and forth, sure.
Maybe if you want to be just discreet about it, that's another reason to do it.
My only sort of caveat on telehealth, I would say, is that if you are going to talk to somebody by way of telehealth, make sure the space that you've chosen to do the therapy in is a space that you feel comfortable and safe in and can talk in.
Yeah.
Don't do it at a bus stop. Don't do it in your car while you're driving.
Yeah.
Be in a place that's quiet where you can be relaxed and focus 100% on the work and not being distracted by something else.
And not being worried, I don't want the person behind me to
Right.
hear what I'm about to say.
Right.
You need to be able to say what you really feel and think at that
Yeah,
moment.
so if you're in your home and you can be in a room that can be insulated from the other people that are there,
Absolutely.
that'll make it much, much better.
Dr. Taylor, I always enjoy talking to you, and I know this is something you'll hear us talk about over and over again throughout our podcast series because it is that important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that we should. It's the silent killer that we should spend a lot more time talking about and understanding and keeping open for dialogue.
Absolutely. All right, Dr. Taylor, anything that I didn't ask you that you want folks to know about today?
Just keep the communication lines open.
Yeah.
That's the main thing.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Taylor, thank you so much. Always
Thank
great
you.
to talk with
Good
you.
to talk to you.
I'm Maira Ansari with Dr. Taylor for We Should Talk About It. Have a great day.